The fluorescent lights of the Sterling Commerce building hummed a monotonous, soul-leeching tune. For Alara, it was the soundtrack of her new life. Sterile, predictable, and drained of color. Each day, she sat in her cubicle, a small gray box within a labyrinth of other gray boxes, and performed the digital ballet of data entry. Her fingers would fly across the keyboard, translating invoices and shipping manifests into neat columns of numbers. A task that demanded just enough focus to keep the ghosts at bay, but not enough to feel truly alive. The air itself was thin, smelling of industrial-grade carpet cleaner and the faint, bitter aroma of burnt coffee from a pot that had been on for hours. It was a place where ambition went to die, replaced by the quiet desperation of making it to Friday. Tonight, the hum was louder, the silence between keystrokes more profound. Most of her colleagues had already fled, their hurried footsteps echoing down the hall before being swallowed by the ding of the elevator. Alara remained, determined to clear one last batch of entries before heading home to her daughter, Lily. It was in these quiet, lonely moments that Stan made his presence known. He was the building's janitor, a man whose posture seemed permanently stooped from a lifetime of resentment. His uniform, a size too small, strained across his paunch, and his face was a permanent sneer carved into soft, pallid flesh. He didn't just clean. He presided over the building's after-hours emptiness, seeing himself as its grim, unacknowledged king. He moved his cart with an intentional, grating screech, the wheels protesting against the polished linoleum. Alara didn't look up, hoping that by refusing to acknowledge him, she might become invisible. It was a foolish hope. The screeching stopped directly behind her cubicle wall. She could feel his presence, a prickling on the back of her neck like a draft of sour air. "Working late again, pretty thing?" His voice was a greasy rasp, thick with an insinuation that made her skin crawl. She kept her eyes fixed on the screen, her fingers frozen above the keys. "Just finishing up, Stan." Her voice was a clipped whisper, a plea for him to move on. He chuckled, a wet, gurgling sound. "Always so dedicated. A real shame nobody's home waiting for a hard worker like you." He knew she was a widow. He had made it a point to find out, asking invasive questions of the front desk security guard until he had the shape of her tragedy. He wielded this knowledge not with sympathy, but as a weapon, a way to pry at the cracks in her composure. Before she could respond, the slosh of liquid was followed by a dark, spreading stain on the carpet just beside her desk. The acrid stench of ammonia and dirty mop water filled her small space. "Oh, clumsy me," Stan said, his voice dripping with false concern. He pushed his bucket, and a wave of gray, sudsy water lapped against the leg of her desk, soaking a small cardboard box underneath it. The box held Lily's school art projects, little crayon drawings and painted handprints she'd brought to decorate her mother's otherwise barren workspace. Alara's breath hitched. She finally turned, her eyes wide with disbelief and fury. "Stan, please, be careful." He looked from the spreading puddle to her face, a slow, malicious grin spreading across his lips. He enjoyed this. He thrived on it. "Just cleaning up, ma'am," he said, emphasizing the last word with mocking formality. "Can't have the place looking messy." A few coworkers still packing up at the far end of the floor glanced over, their faces impassive. They saw the spill, they saw the janitor, and they saw Alara's stricken expression. Then, as if bound by an unspoken pact of non-involvement, they turned away, zipping their bags and lowering their voices, hastening their retreat. They dismissed it. It was just Stan being Stan. It wasn't their problem. Alara was alone, the smell of filth rising around her, the quiet judgment of her peers' silence more humiliating than the act itself. The next day, the harassment bled from passive aggression into something more deliberate. Alara arrived to find her keyboard sticky, coated in a thin, sugary film that smelled of cheap soda. She spent 20 minutes meticulously cleaning each key with an alcohol wipe, her jaw tight. Later that morning, a critical file she had saved to the shared network drive was mysteriously gone. It was a full day's work, vanished. When she reported it to her supervisor, A harried man named Mr. Henderson whose tie was always slightly askew. He had sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. Alara, are you sure you saved it correctly? The system is very reliable. He didn't look at her, his eyes already darting back to the blinking light on his office phone. The implication was clear. The error was hers. She knew it was Stan. She had no proof, only the chilling certainty that came from being the sole focus of his petty malevolence. He had access to the entire building, including the server room in the basement. It would have been easy for him. The denial of her reality, the casual dismissal from her boss, was a second layer of violation. It made her feel small, insignificant, as if her own senses couldn't be trusted. She decided to escalate, to take her concern to the building's management office. The manager, a woman with perfectly coiffed hair and a smile that never reached her eyes, listened with polite impatience. Alara explained the incidents, the spilled water, the veiled comments, the sticky keyboard, the missing file. She kept her voice steady, presenting the facts as calmly as she could. Stan, the manager said, tapping a perfectly manicured nail on her desk blotter. He's been with us for 15 years. He's a bit gruff, but he's harmless. The word harmless hung in the air. A verdict delivered without a trial. Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding. The manager continued, her tone shifting from feigned concern to condescending advice. These office environments can be stressful. Sometimes we misinterpret things. Why don't you try to just get along with him? I'm sure if you're friendly, he'll be friendly back. It was a masterclass in corporate deflection. The problem wasn't the aggressor. It was her perception of the aggression. Her worth was so negligible that the hassle of investigating a janitor outweighed her right to feel safe at her job. She walked out of the office feeling hollowed out. The system was designed to protect itself, and Stan, for all his grime, was a part of that system. She was not. Later that afternoon, as she made a cup of tea in the break room, he appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame and blocking her only exit. He was polishing a small wrench with a dirty rag, the rhythmic squeak of metal on cloth filling the small room. Heard you went to see the big boss, he said, not looking at her. His voice was low, laced with a triumphant venom. Telling tales. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. She clutched her warm mug, the ceramic a fragile shield. I need to get back to my desk, Stan. He didn't move. He just kept polishing the wrench, a faint smirk playing on his lips. They don't care about you, he whispered, the words a poisoned dart. Nobody here does. You're just a little mouse, scurrying in the walls. And I'm the one who sets the traps. He finally stepped aside, granting her passage with a mocking bow. As she hurried past, her entire body trembling, she understood. The denial of her worth wasn't just a byproduct of the system. It was the very thing that gave him power. Alara's apartment was a small sanctuary of warmth and light against the city's indifferent gray. It smelled of cinnamon from the oatmeal she made Lily for breakfast and the faint, clean scent of her daughter's lavender shampoo. Here, she was not a dismissed employee or a target. She was a mother. She was the keeper of memories, the architect of a fragile peace. The walls were dotted with framed photographs. Alara and her husband, David, on their wedding day, his arm wrapped securely around her, his smile so wide it crinkled the corners of his eyes. Another of David holding a newborn Lily, his large, capable hands looking impossibly gentle as they cradled his tiny daughter. These images were not just decorations. They were anchors. They reminded her of who she was, of the love that had shaped her and the strength she inherited from it. David had been a builder, a man who worked with his hands, who believed in solid foundations and unwavering integrity. Dignity, Ellie, he used to say, his voice a low rumble as they sat on their porch swing. It's the one thing no one can take from you. You can lose your job, your money, your house. But your dignity, you have to give that away. Don't you ever give it away. His sudden death in a workplace accident a year ago hadn't just stolen her husband. It had fractured her world, leaving her to navigate the rubble alone. She took the data entry job because it was quiet, stable, and allowed her to be home every evening to put Lily to bed. It was supposed to be a stepping stone, a place to catch her breath before she figured out how to rebuild. Her brother, Marcus, had wanted her to move in with him. His voice, a gravelly boom over the phone, had been thick with concern. "Ellie, you and the kid can have the whole upstairs. I'll make sure you're taken care of. You don't have to do this alone." Marcus, or Rec, as he was known to his brothers in the Hells Angels, was a world away from the corporate drone she had become. He was a giant of a man, his life encased in worn leather and powered by the thunder of a Harley-Davidson. They had grown up in a rough neighborhood, their bond forged in the crucible of a difficult childhood. He had chosen a path of fierce, tribal loyalty, while she had sought the quiet stability David had offered. Yet the love between them was an unbreakable cord. She had refused his offer gently but firmly. "I have to do this, Mark. For me. For Lily. I have to know I can stand on my own." It was a matter of pride, a testament to the lessons David had taught her. She didn't want to be a burden or a charity case. More than that, she didn't want to unleash her brother's world upon her own. She knew his protective instincts were a force of nature, an avalanche that, once started, could not be stopped. Telling him about a pathetic, sneering janitor felt like using a cannon to kill a fly. It was her problem to solve. So when he called, she would talk about Lily's latest drawing or a funny thing that happened at the park. She would paint a picture of placid normalcy, carefully editing out the creeping dread that followed her through the hallways of the Sterling Commerce building. One evening, she sat on her couch, the phone to her ear, listening to the distant rumble of bikes as Marcus spoke from his clubhouse. "You sound tired, Ellie. Everything okay?" His question was casual, but she heard the edge of concern in it. "Just a long week," she lied, forcing a lightness into her tone. "You know how it is. Just data." She was protecting him, she told herself, from a fight that was beneath him. In truth, she was protecting herself, clinging to the belief that she could still be the person David believed her to be. Strong, self-reliant, and in possession of a dignity she would never surrender. The pressure built like steam in a sealed pipe, the end of the week bringing with it a suffocating tension. Stan's campaign of psychological warfare had intensified. He no longer bothered with subtlety. He would stand just out of her line of sight and whistle a tuneless, unnerving melody. He would accidentally unplug her computer terminal from the wall socket, forcing a reboot and costing her precious minutes of work. Each act was small, deniable, but they accumulated into a mountain of dread. Alara felt a constant, low-grade hum of anxiety, a feeling of being watched and hunted within the fluorescent-lit confines of her office. The silence of her colleagues had also evolved. It was no longer passive ignorance. It was now a deliberate, uncomfortable avoidance. They would change their path to the coffee machine to avoid walking past her desk. If she entered the break room, conversations would halt abruptly. They didn't want to be tainted by her problem, afraid that Stan's toxic attention might splash onto them. The breaking point came on a Friday evening, under the sickly orange glow of the parking garage lights. The structure was a concrete beast, a series of descending circles that amplified every sound. The scrape of a shoe, the cough of a distant engine, the drip of water from an overhead pipe, each noise echoed with unsettling clarity. Alara walked quickly, her keys clutched in her hand like a weapon. The garage was nearly empty, a hollowed-out skeleton. She just wanted to get to her car, to escape the building and the man who haunted its halls. As she rounded a concrete pillar, he was there. Stan. He wasn't holding his cart or a mop. He was just standing there, his arms crossed, blocking the path to her sedan. A chill, colder than the damp concrete air, snaked down her spine. "In a hurry?" he asked, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. "Please get out of my way, Stan," she said, her own voice sounding small and thin. He took a step toward her, and she instinctively took one back. He smiled, a predator's grin. "I told you, they don't care. No one's coming to help you." He took another step, closing the distance between them. The smell of stale cigarettes and sweat washed over her. She was trapped, her back now pressed against the cold, unforgiving surface of a concrete support beam. From the corner of her eye, she saw a car on the level above slow down, its headlights illuminating them for a brief moment before it sped up and disappeared. Someone had seen, and they had done nothing. The silence of the garage was absolute, broken only by her own ragged breathing and the thumping of her heart. He raised a hand, not to strike her, but to brace himself against the pillar next to her head, boxing her in completely. His face was inches from hers, his breath hot and foul. "You think you're better than me, don't you? With your sad little story and your quiet little desk." His voice was a low, hateful hiss. "But you're nothing. You're just a ghost in this building. And I can do whatever I want." He wasn't just a bully anymore. He was a manifestation of all the indifference and cruelty she had endured. He was the smirking manager, the dismissive supervisor, the colleagues who looked away. Alara's fear was a physical thing, a cold knot in her stomach, but beneath it, a different feeling began to smolder. A hard, defiant ember of the dignity David had spoken of. She met his gaze, her chin lifted, her body trembling but her will refusing to break. The silence stretched, a taut wire of menace, in the vast, empty tomb of the garage. Stan's face twisted in fury at her silent defiance. Her refusal to cower, to dissolve into the terrified puddle he expected, enraged him. With a guttural snarl, he swiped his arm out, not at her, but at the purse slung over her shoulder. The strap broke and the bag tumbled to the ground, its contents scattering across the grimy concrete with a series of pathetic, clattering sounds. A tube of lipstick rolled under a nearby car. Her wallet landed open, exposing a few loose dollar bills. A small packet of tissues, a half-eaten granola bar, and a set of keys skittered across the floor. And there, lying face up amidst the debris, was a small, silver-plated frame. It was her favorite picture. David and a 5-year-old Lily at the beach, both of them squinting in the sun, their faces alight with pure, unadulterated joy. David's arm was draped around their daughter's shoulders, and he was looking at the camera with that familiar, soul-steadying smile. The sight of it, lying there on the filthy ground, vulnerable and exposed, pierced through Alara's fear. That frame held more than a photograph. It held the last tangible piece of her perfect, unbroken world. It was her heart, outside her body. Stan saw where her gaze was fixed. He followed her eyes to the photo, and a new, even crueler idea lit up his face. He let out a low, ugly laugh. "What's this? The happy family?" He sneered, his voice dripping with acid. He took a deliberate step forward, his heavy, grease-stained work boot hovering directly over the silver frame. "Such a shame," he whispered, putting his weight onto the ball of his foot, preparing to crush it, to grind her most precious memory into the dirt and broken glass. In that instant, every calculated thought, every ounce of fear, vanished from Alara's mind. There was only a singular, primal need to protect. She didn't scream. She didn't plead. She acted. With a choked cry, she lunged forward, dropping to her knees on the cold, gritty concrete. She didn't try to push him or fight him. Her movement was one of pure sacrifice. She threw her body over the scattered contents of her purse, her hands covering the precious photograph, her back hunched against the impending impact. She braced herself for the crunch of his boot on her hands, on her spine, willing to absorb any pain to shield that small, shining square of a life that was gone forever. She knelt there, a mother protecting her child, a widow protecting her love, her entire being focused on this one, selfless act of preservation. It was not the action of a victim. It was the action of a warrior, fighting not with fists, but with the unyielding strength of her heart. The world narrowed to the space of that concrete floor, her hands shielding a memory from a man determined to destroy it. From a fourth-floor window overlooking the parking garage, Chloe, a junior graphic designer, watched the scene unfold. She had been one of the colleagues who had turned away earlier in the week, muttering to her deskmate that it was best not to get involved. Guilt had been a small, nagging splinter in her conscience ever since. Now, she stood frozen, her hand half raised to tap on the glass, a useless gesture. She saw Alara's purse fall, saw the intimate contents of a life spill out onto the dirty floor. She saw the glint of the picture frame, and she saw the look of pure, predatory malice on Stan's face as he raised his foot. Her breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just Stan being Stan. This was cruelty, stark and unvarnished. When Alara dropped to her knees, not to beg, but to shield the photo with her own body, something shifted in Chloe. It was the raw, desperate courage of the act. The quiet data entry clerk, the woman they had all dismissed as a fragile mouse, was demonstrating a kind of bravery Chloe couldn't imagine possessing. She wasn't fighting back. She was protecting something sacred. It was a profoundly dignified and heartbreaking sight. Chloe looked at Mark, an accountant from the next cubicle, who was standing beside her, his face pale. "We have to do something," she whispered, her voice trembling. Mark just shook his head, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. "What can we do?" Look at him, but the seed was planted. The comfortable veil of non-involvement had been torn away. They were no longer just observers. They were witnesses. Down in the garage, another car, belonging to Mr. Henderson, slowed as it prepared to exit. He saw the tableau. His employee on her knees, the janitor looming over her like a vulture. For a moment, he considered hitting the accelerator, pretending he hadn't seen. But Alara's posture, so fiercely protective, held him captive. He cut the engine, his hand hovering over his phone, his mind racing. The whispers of respect had not yet found a voice, but in the silent, watching eyes of her colleagues, a profound rethinking was taking place. Their judgment of Alara was dissolving, replaced by a dawning, terrible shame for their own silence. The image of her kneeling on the concrete, a silent guardian of a shattered memory, was burning itself into their minds. Just as Stan's boot began its downward descent, a sound began. It was not a sound, precisely, but a feeling, a low-frequency vibration that seemed to emanate from the very foundations of the concrete garage. It was a physical presence, a tremor that rattled the loose gravel on the floor and hummed up through the soles of Alara's shoes. The vibration grew, coalescing into a deep, guttural rumble, the sound of a sleeping dragon stirring in its lair. Stan froze, his foot still poised mid-air, his head cocked in confusion. The rumble swelled, multiplying, layering into a chorus of thunder. It was the sound of pure, untamed American horsepower, a symphony of V-twin engines roaring in unison. Then came the light. A single, brilliant headlight cut through the dusky gloom at the garage entrance, a piercing white eye. It was followed by another, and then a dozen more, fanning out like a conquering army. A wave of chrome and black leather flooded into the garage, the deafening roar of their engines bouncing off the concrete walls, creating a maelstrom of sound that was both terrifying and magnificent. They were a phalanx of steel beasts, Harleys of every description, road kings, street glides, fat boys, each one a testament to power and freedom. They moved with a practiced, intimidating grace, filling the entrance and blocking the only way out. At the head of the pack, a massive rider on a custom chopper with ape-hanger handlebars killed his engine. The sudden, shocking silence that followed was more menacing than the noise. Every other engine cut out in perfect sync, leaving only the drip-drip-drip of water from a pipe somewhere in the echoing quiet. The man at the front swung a leg over his bike, his heavy leather boots hitting the concrete with an authoritative thud. He was immense, a mountain of a man clad in a dusty, road-worn leather vest. Stitched across the back was the iconic, grinning death's head of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club, and below it, the word, Captain. This was Marcus. This was Rec. He pushed his sunglasses up onto his forehead, revealing eyes as cold and gray as a winter storm. He didn't scan the garage. He didn't look for his sister. His gaze locked directly, immediately onto Stan, who was still frozen in his pathetic pose of aggression, a deer caught not in headlights, but in the focused glare of a wolf pack. The other bikers, 20 of them at least, dismounted in near silence, their faces hard and unreadable. They formed a silent, imposing semicircle, their collective presence sucking the very air out of the garage. They didn't need to speak. They didn't need to threaten. Their arrival was the threat. Marcus took a slow, deliberate step forward, the jingle of a small chain on his boot the only sound. He walked past the front of his bike, his eyes never leaving Stan's terrified face. The onlookers in the windows above were breathless. Mr. Henderson sat in his car, his hand still on his phone, utterly forgotten. Alara, still on her knees, slowly lifted her head, her tear-streaked face a mask of confusion and dawning recognition. The air in the garage had changed. The stench of fear was no longer hers. It was pouring off Stan in waves. Marcus stopped a few feet away from the pathetic scene. His voice, when it came, was not a shout. It was a low, dangerously calm rumble that carried with it the weight of absolute authority. "You have 10 seconds to explain why my sister is on the ground." The words hit the air with the force of a physical blow. My sister. The revelation rippled through the onlookers. Chloe gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Mr. Henderson's jaw went slack. The quiet, mousy data entry clerk and the formidable captain of the Hells Angels? The connection was so incongruous, so utterly unbelievable, it seemed to recalibrate reality itself. Stan's face, which had been a mask of cruel confidence moments before, crumpled. The blood drained from it, leaving behind a pasty, terrified white. He stammered, his mouth opening and closing like a fish, but no sound came out. His leg, still hovering over the picture frame, began to tremble uncontrollably. Marcus's gaze flickered down for a fraction of a second, taking in the scene. The spilled purse, the scattered items, his sister on her knees, and Stan's boot poised to desecrate a family memory. His eyes, when they returned to Stan's, were no longer cold. They were burning with a controlled, white-hot rage that was far more terrifying than any outburst. "You were going to step on that picture," he stated. It wasn't a question. It was a judgment. Two of the other bikers, massive men with beards and arms covered in ink, began to walk slowly, deliberately, to flank Stan on either side. They didn't touch him. They just stood there, their sheer size and proximity an invisible cage. One of them, a biker with a patch that read Sarge, leaned down and spoke to a panicked building security guard who had just jogged onto the scene. "That woman," Sarge said, his voice a low growl nodding toward Alara. "She's family. When her husband David died, the captain, her brother, made us all a promise. We look out for her. We look out for her kid. She's one of us. This building, this job, this is supposed to be her safe place." The security guard, a young man no older than 25, simply nodded, his eyes wide as saucers. The truth was now laid bare, not just for Stan, but for everyone watching. Alara wasn't just some anonymous employee. She was protected. She was loved. She was part of a tribe, a fierce and loyal brotherhood that had just been summoned by an act of profound disrespect. Marcus ignored the stammering, pleading noises that were now leaking from Stan's throat. He walked past the janitor as if he were a piece of insignificant furniture. He knelt down in front of his sister, his massive frame eclipsing her small one. The contrast was startling. The hardened, leather-clad biker and the trembling woman in her simple office attire. His large, calloused hands, hands that could probably crush stone, were impossibly gentle as he reached out and cupped her face. "Ellie," he murmured, his voice now stripped of all menace, filled only with a deep, aching tenderness. "You okay?" She could only nod, a fresh wave of tears spilling over. He had come. He had heard the call she never made. Stan finally found his voice, a high-pitched, desperate whine. "I'm sorry. I didn't know. I swear. I didn't know who she was." Marcus didn't even turn around. He simply said, over his shoulder, "It shouldn't matter who she is." The simple, profound truth of that statement silenced the entire garage. Respect wasn't conditional. It wasn't reserved for the connected or the powerful. It was a basic human right, a right Stan had so gleefully violated. Marcus then turned his attention back to the mess on the floor. With the same gentleness he'd shown his sister, he began picking up her scattered belongings. He retrieved her wallet, the lipstick, the keys. Finally, he picked up the silver-plated picture frame. The glass was cracked from the impact of the fall. He ran his thumb over the crack, his expression hardening for a moment before he carefully brushed the dust from David's smiling face. He helped Alara to her feet, his arm a solid, steadying presence around her shoulders. He placed the frame back in her hand. "He's okay," he said softly, referring to the image of her late husband. Then, and only then, did he turn to face the problem. Mr. Henderson had finally gotten out of his car and was scurrying over, his face a mess of panic and obsequiousness. "Sir, I am so sorry. There's been a terrible misunderstanding." Marcus held up a hand, cutting him off. His eyes were fixed on Stan, who was now visibly shaking between the two silent bikers. Marcus didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "He's fired," he said to Henderson, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "He clears out his locker, and he never sets foot in this building again. Are we clear?" Henderson nodded frantically. "Yes, absolutely, of course. Consider it done." The bikers flanking Stan each placed a heavy hand on his shoulders, a gesture that was both a restraint and a dismissal. They began to escort him toward the service elevator, his feet shuffling, his head bowed in utter defeat. The reign of the petty tyrant was over, not with a bang, but with a quiet, ignominious retreat. Marcus then looked at Alara's purse, the strap torn. One of the other bikers, a wiry man with nimble fingers, stepped forward. "Got it, Cap," he said. He pulled a small multi-tool from a pouch on his belt and, with a few deft movements, began working on the broken strap, using a small piece of wire to temporarily but securely reattach it. As he worked, Marcus walked over to Alara's car. He pulled a small, circular sticker from his wallet. It was a support sticker, a simplified version of their club's death's head insignia. He carefully affixed it to the bottom corner of her rear windshield. It was a small symbol, but its meaning was immense. It was a mark of protection. It was a warning. It told the world, "This person is under our watch." The act of recognition was complete, a quiet, symbolic restoration of the order Stan had tried to upend. The departure was as memorable as the arrival. The bikers didn't linger. Justice had been served, and their purpose was fulfilled. The man who had fixed Alara's purse handed it back to her with a respectful nod. "All set, ma'am." Marcus gave his sister's shoulder a final, reassuring squeeze. "Go on home to Lily," he said. "I'll follow you." Alara, her composure slowly returning, got into her small sedan, her hand still trembling slightly as she gripped the steering wheel. She looked at the picture frame on her passenger seat, the cracked glass a reminder of the battle she had just endured and won. She started her engine, the quiet purr of her four-cylinder car a stark contrast to the machines of her protectors. As she pulled out of her parking space, the bikers mounted their Harleys. With a synchronized, earth-shaking roar, 20 engines exploded back to life. But this time, the sound was different. It wasn't a threat. It was a declaration. They fell into formation around her little car, 2 bikes in front, 2 behind, and the rest flanking her on either side, creating a moving fortress of leather and steel. Marcus rode directly behind her, his single headlight a guardian angel in her rearview mirror. As they ascended the ramps of the garage, Chloe, Mr. Henderson, and the few other remaining employees watched in stunned silence. They saw the small, unremarkable sedan enveloped by the formidable motorcycle club, an honor guard escorting their queen from the battlefield. The sight was surreal, powerful, and deeply humbling. It was an image of absolute loyalty, a visual promise that she would never be alone or unprotected again. The convoy rolled out into the night, the thunder of their engines a receding roar that promised retribution for any who dared to harm what they held dear. Back in the garage, the silence they left behind was heavy with contemplation and shame. The air in the Sterling Commerce Building had been irrevocably changed. The next morning, when Alara walked through the lobby, something was different. The security guard at the front desk, the same young man from the night before, stood a little straighter and gave her a nod of profound respect. As she walked through the office, the usual avoidance was gone. People met her gaze. They didn't speak of what happened, but their eyes conveyed a new understanding. They saw not a victim, but a woman of quiet, formidable strength, a person of hidden depths and powerful allegiances. Chloe approached her at the coffee machine, her expression earnest. "Alara," she said softly. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry." Alara simply nodded, a small, forgiving smile on her lips. No more needed to be said. She walked to her cubicle, the space feeling less like a cage and more like her own territory. She placed the silver frame on her desk, the crack in the glass now looking less like damage and more like a battle scar. It sat beside the crayon drawings from Lily, a testament to what she had fought to protect. The faint, phantom scent of leather and gasoline seemed to linger in the air, a silent, enduring promise of dignity reclaimed and respect secured.